Eugene. Now you can see he is currently doing so many things, so he is obviously a director of Prescient, principal trainer there. He's a chief data scientist at Alpha Zeta. He's also a founder of very massive communities in the data science field, which is called Data Science Sydney Meetup Community, and also the Sydney users of our forum. He's the founder of Analyst First. He's the founding partner of Advantage Data Consulting. He's a co-founder of RIA. So you can see that he's pretty much involved in many different things, and I'm going to allow him to talk about more about his profession and what exactly he does. But it has been really an honor to get him here and address this meetup. Data science is something that is really an important aspect. A lot of organizations are looking at data in a very different perspective, understanding the importance of data. As Steve was saying, taking data-driven sort of decisions when it comes to customers, overall operations. So I'm sure that there will be a lot of interest from all of you. So please, with big round of applause, please welcome Eugene. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Gaurav. I need just to momentarily set up my little laptop here because this is where my notes are, even though the slides are over there. So just give me a second. And we're in business. Right, so today's talk is about something which is not exactly about what I do. If people want to know about what I do, as Gaurav mentioned, you're welcome to ask me. I may mention one or two things in passing, but I'm going to be talking more about something that I'm witnessing in the wider world rather than something that's happening in my own little world. And that little something I call the data literacy revolution. The value of this slide is if you do hear or see anything you're interested in, my contact details, their phone number, email address, Twitter handle, and also this talk is being videoed wonderfully by Troy up the back there and his son Josh, and they will be placing that video on the Data Science Sydney YouTube channel. So if you need any help in finding that, get in touch with me, although it will be on the prescient.com media page as well. And if you're interested in anything you hear, you may be interested in other presentations on that site. Bunch of companies, yes, Riask, Alpha Zeta. There's also Aurum, which is a startup that I'm involved in that actually uses artificial intelligence to value data sets, because apparently data is the new oil, but no one really knows how to value it. And Prescient's the one I really want to mention specifically. Prescient is a data science, analytics, and data literacy training company. So we offer a number of quality courses in this space, increasingly globally. So 3 countries so far, but I think this year we'll move to about 12. And we're now reaching the point where you're probably in the last stages of being able to learn those courses from me personally. So pretty soon it won't be me teaching many of them at all. Also, Alpha Zeta deserves mentioning. Those of you interested in a freelance career in data science and analytics or anything to do with data, so data meets freelancing and independence, come and talk to me. We may have an interesting conversation. So, wrong computer. This computer. So, again. So, I'm going to be talking about something called the data literacy revolution, which is something I'm watching happen right now, something that by rights should have started about 2 decades ago, but only seems to be taking off now. I'm going to tell you what is bringing this thing about, where data analytics, which I'm defining as pretty much any sensible use of data, is today. And then I'm going to talk about the future. And the future is where this data literacy thing matters. And this being the Future Shapers group, I think it's a very pertinent topic. And of course, how can you join in? Which is something I think most of the people in this room are interested in. So, some obvious things, some motherhood statements. The obvious thing is we're in a period of rapid technological change. And not just technological, we're in a period of rapid technological, economic, social change. Surprise, surprise, you all know this. We see new technologies every month, and indeed they, yesterday's act of genius is today's disposable triviality, hence that rather lame joke, would you like fries? A nap for that. These days just about everything can be turned into a nap. And that actually is the fact that so more and more things are becoming apps rather than being huge productions. There's a lot more to say on that topic. Let's talk a little bit about the context and the consequences. So far, this is just a motherhood statement. So far, any slick presentation given by someone with much better Big Four consulting credentials than me will probably start with something like this, and everybody will nod and say, wow, this guy must be pretty clever. Okay, we know this stuff already. As I mentioned, it's not just technological change, there's also social change. Well, again, no big surprise there. And the social change doesn't really follow the technology at the same pace. In fact, social change happens in rather odd ways. It sort of doesn't happen at all and then it suddenly explodes. If you look at the history of technology, a lot of technologies were obviously groundbreaking, but they took decades and sometimes centuries to make the difference that you think they would have made long before. So here are some examples of social change, of people people adapting to technologies. And one technology that I'm really interested in, and this is a very important business information technology, literacy and numeracy. There was a time when IT professionals would sit on the ground, cross-legged, usually barefoot, and write with a chisel on a clay tablet, and then bake the clay. And of course, because they were the technical nerds, they could read and write. The important business people were too important to know how to read and write. I mean, that's a technical skill, right? So this whole distinction between what is technical and what is a core business skill, that's changed over the years. But there was a time when reading and writing was a very rare skill indeed, and certainly not considered a technical skill. More recently, we had computer literacy come along. And without defining this data literacy thing, I'll try to do that to some extent later. What I want to do is to draw the most obvious analogy, and that is the analogy with computer literacy. So computer literacy is that thing that everybody here has, and just about everybody that they know has, except for people who are generally not participating in the economy, in the workplace environment the same way. These days, if you want to be a white-collar professional, it's just taken for granted that you're computer literate. I do remember maybe 15 years ago, you'd still hear stories about primarily very senior people, C-suite executives and board members who don't know how to read, don't know how to send emails or don't use a web browser. Those days are gone. Everybody is computer literate now. And when you think about the vast volume of knowledge that is in your heads and in the heads of all of your peers about this thing called computer literacy, and imagine you could weigh information. You can actually measure information in various ways. I see a hand.
During that period of the 90s, as you mentioned, only the senior management had access to emails and internet. All the junior level staff had no access, but they didn't know how to access their emails and how to send things. So you're right, but there is a contradictory because the junior level staff were not.
Well, you're actually supporting my point, because my claim is that the junior level staff acquired those skills. It's the senior level staff who lagged. So thank you. But in the early 2000s to mid 2000s, it certainly wasn't like that at all. Internet, computers were ubiquitous. Some people didn't have the skill. My point is now it is completely ubiquitous. It is a skill you must have, and it's not a trivial amount of skill. If I consider how much computer knowledge whatever computer knowledge is, we all have, compared to how much computer knowledge I might have had as a freshly minted grad with a computer science bachelor's in 1994, and I'm showing my age here. I think if you could measure that amount of information, which you can, it's not the same amount of information by any stretch, but just in terms of sheer volume, they're comparable. You know, you all carry in your heads as much knowledge about computers as an IT professional, as a computer science graduate from a long time ago. Not the same information, but it's not a trivial amount. So you do this not to be IT professionals, you do this just to be professionals. You don't think of yourselves as computer people, you think of yourselves as just participants in the 21st century economy. That's what I mean by literacy. So literacy is the stuff that you need to know, not to be an expert, but just to play. And computer literacy is, I think, the best analogy for that. So the remainder of this course will be to explain why why data literacy is a coming must-have. I'm going to be spending a while on that. And I'll also spend a while actually, finally, defining it. I actually think it's very important to explain to people why something's important before explaining what it actually is. Then they'll listen. So, two big questions I'm going to address in this talk is, why is technological change so rapid? And more importantly, what are the consequences of that technological change? And really, that's just a setup. The real question is, how will we adapt to the widespread use of data and analytics? Because that's going to be the kill shot in this presentation. So when I say why is technological change so rapid, I mean what aspects of technological change are impacting everybody in this room. Again, there are going to be no real surprises, at least at the start. And this is a PMI meeting. This is a lot of folks here are project managers, as I understand. So I think this is an interesting part of the presentation for you folks, because I think we've gotten better, thanks to the sort of techniques partly that you folks have developed. We've gotten better at doing stuff. We've gotten much more efficient at writing software, or building bridges, or running events, or taking a product from idea to delivery globally. That's becoming easier and more accessible than ever. The amount of things that a human being, without billions of dollars or even millions of dollars to their name, can do from their bedroom in their fluffy bunny slippers is amazing. The amount of the logistics they can set up, the production facilities, the computer cloud capabilities, the physical and electronic production logistics and information infrastructure at our fingertips is amazing, and the way it can be integrated is amazing. And we can actually grab people, we can grab staff, we can grab offshore labor, with sites like odesk.com. By the way, one of the reasons I know that there is a real problem with the efficiency of modern enterprises is that I'm still not seeing large enterprises make use of sites like Odesk. Well, they used to be called Odesk, now it's upwork.com. There are some amazingly powerful efficiencies at everybody's fingertips. We're just getting better at doing things, and particularly we're getting better at doing stuff. If you can think of doing something, you can do it very quickly. Now, that has some very interesting consequences, which you may not be aware of. And there's a bit of a clue to that in this picture here, because I'm actually now borrowing from ideas of Eric Ries. Who's heard of the lean startup? So I'm talking about the lean startup idea, which says we're getting better at doing stuff. If we decide what we're going to do, we can deliver to spec much more efficiently, much more reliably than ever. However, that's true of you, that's true of your competitors, that's true of everyone. So winning is now not about being super efficient, everybody's super efficient. Winning is about knowing what to do. Winning isn't about doing the thing, although it's decreasingly about doing the thing. It's increasingly about choosing the thing to do and doing it before other people do. And also it's about learning faster than anyone else. So embracing uncertainty, experimenting and iterating your way to success is increasingly how enterprise does what it does. Now, we've seen improvements in project methodology, we've seen improvements in how we manage large numbers of people. We can do all sorts of amazing things leveraging information technology. We've got more and more infrastructure, we've got globalization, we've got better connectivity. Look, I'm not going to go through everything on this slide, but the point is that just about everything you might want to do as an entrepreneur these days. Let me rephrase that. Many of the things you couldn't do as an entrepreneur, couldn't even dream of as an entrepreneur a decade ago, are now within reach. You can buy as a commodity production, infrastructure, logistics, information technology at ridiculous volumes if you believe that's the right thing to do, if that's a sensible investment. And the question is it a sensible investment? So, as Eric Ries put it, the big question of our time is not can it be built, but should it be built? So, what should we do rather than how do we do it is now the key question. And what does that mean? Let me now reframe that whole situation for you in a way that I think is going to have a bit of an ominous impact to some of you, because you're going to say, well, wait a minute, you're talking about my career now. So here it comes. The word executive. Think about the word executive. Conventionally, what does the word executive mean? it means important person, doesn't it? We use the word executive to designate someone fairly important. You know, who's the most important person, the most important employee at least in the company? The chief executive, right? So executive means important person. Now let's look at the etymology of the word. Executive. What do? They execute. They make things happen. They do stuff. They build stuff. And that's sensible, right? Because certainly in the past, your ability to make things happen set you apart. That's what made you useful. That's what made you clever. Getting stuff done was hard. Getting big things done was very hard. So here's my point. That thing that executives do, the executing bit, we as a society have gotten really, really, really good at. And those of you here, particularly in project management space, that's your job, right? Your job is to make stuff happen. Your job is to execute. Well, I am now claiming that thanks to all the advances partly in your field, it's becoming a commodity. It's becoming competitive. It's becoming easier and easier. But there's this other thing that people didn't have to worry as much about in the past, which is deciding what to do next. So what I want to suggest is that in the future, one of my future vision things, I don't think we're going to call them executives. I think we're going to call them something or other that comes from the word decision. Because the skill of knowing what to do, it's a very different skill to getting something done or getting a bunch of people to get something done. And yes, there is overlap. Obviously, you need to make good decisions in order to get people to do stuff, and sometimes in order to make good decisions, you need to get certain things done. But there's sufficient non-overlap as well. They are different skills, and it's not just about deciding what to do, it's about deciding what to do in that weird, rapidly changing, increasingly complex world that I was talking about. So it's a rather specialized skill, or should we say gift. We're talking about conditions of uncertainty, conditions of competition, and certainly conditions of change and disruption. So again, I've said a whole bunch of motherhood statement stuff that you're used to. What you might not have been used to is this idea that executing is becoming the commodity. It's going down market. Deciding is going up market. It's getting more important. So I would also say that the nature of work is changing. And I'll have more. Well, actually, it's right there on the slide. So the nature of work is changing, and work is increasingly less about doing and more about deciding. That's not because doing doesn't need doing needs doing, but that doing is increasingly being done trivially. It's being done by machines. It's being done by offshore labour. It's being done by less skilled staff that you hire because you've got much better processes and much better ways of getting more out of lower cost resources. So the doing thing, well, we still need things done, but you know, where we might have had 100 people working on something, we might have a dozen Amazon calls instead. And what happens to the skill set of the manager of those people? I think the skill set of managing the Amazon calls is rather different, don't you? And I think there's quite a few people here in the automation space as well. I'd expect so. So much is being automated, and as work becomes automated, what's left for people to do? Well, I would put it to you that increasingly what's left is for people to do what machines can't do, which is to make decisions. Now, I should say something about AI, and I'm doing scare quotes, and I can't use both hands because I've got a microphone. But AI is not that smart. There may be a singularity, it's not a good thing, but I don't think it's around the corner. AI does make decisions. It tends to make fairly systematic, usually fairly low-level decisions at this stage. AIs are not running countries. The sort of decisions that are made by actual executives when they want to make decisions. By the way, I find that executives make decisions far less frequently than you would think they do. But when executives, when you have the sort of decisions that executives should be making, or would be making in a country that hasn't been in sustained economic growth for 26 years and where huge chunks of the economy are protected oligopolies, when that's not the case, you may have you may have the situation where people need to make decisions and the machines can't make those decisions for them. And those decisions need to be made not just at the very top, but all the way down the organization. And the interesting thing about machines, they can't make decisions for you, but they can support your decisions. So if you're in a very competitive world, you've got to make the best decisions you can, or you're gone. And if you're going to make the best decisions you can, you need to be using all of the available information that you can. So that's going to be the next slide. But is everybody comfortable so far? Well, comfortable may be the wrong idea for the theme of this talk. Does everybody at least accept the possibility that we're entering a world where the one skill that you bring as a human being is your ability to synthesize information and turn it into decisions? So, hand, yes.
I think it's quite interesting. The paradox is right now the companies who can execute the strategy are the ones which succeed. And what you're saying is it's all about having the strategy, you'll find someone to execute.
I think when you say companies, let's talk about scale. I think there's a lot of mantras around the need to execute. I think what blocks execution in large organizations is not lack of ability. I'd like to take anybody who talks about the ability to execute and send them to China for a year. I don't think there's any problem with our ability to execute as long as we don't have self-imposed bureaucratic and political and incentive-based obstructions, which I find most people in large organizations spent their time maneuvering rather than getting things done. So yeah, I've heard this claim. I don't think it's true of smaller startups, and I don't think it's true of large, healthy corporates either. Was there another hand? But I think it's a very valid claim regarding your typical corporate. This is not my talk where I talk about what's wrong with the corporates, but happy to do that some other time. So what I'm trying to get you to is to see that perhaps good decisions are now more important than ever before, and going to get more important still. And here's the good news. Good decisions aren't always important. And in my consulting career, what I've come across are plenty of organizations where, frankly, it doesn't matter if they make good decisions or not. For many organizations, it actually doesn't matter. If you're a monopoly, it kind of doesn't matter. This is all being recorded, but if someone wants to get me some wine and talk to me one-on-one, I'll give you some idea of what sectors and areas are more like this than others. But yes, it's absolutely true that not all situations require good decision making. I will say, however, that if you're in a highly uncertain and complex environment, and where that uncertainty and complexity introduces adversity, ideally the sort of adversity that can completely wipe you out as an organization, you kind of want to make good decisions. So if you're comfortable in bed with a cup of hot cocoa when there's something good on TV, you probably don't need to make any good decisions at that point. If you're surfing a tsunami, you probably need to make good decisions from moment to moment just to survive. Different sort of situation. Particularly when organizations have competitors, not only, but especially when organizations have competitors that are also trying to survive, and there's only so much market, there's only so much opportunity. And certainly in those situations where organizations are actively trying to knock each other out, and that does happen, you need to make good decisions. Also, good decisions are important when you have to make a lot of decisions. So making good decisions systematic. If you have to make a lot of decisions, you will very quickly fail if you're not making good decisions. If you only have to make one decision a year, and you might get lucky. The thing is, there's a lot of uncertainty in the world. But if you have to make a lot of decisions, like a trading company, for example, which places bets every day, you will very, very quickly discover whether your decision-making ability is good or bad. Now, the other important thing about being the sort of organization that must make good decisions or else is that they must make good decisions or else. So for most organizations, the real issue is that they're happy not to make a decision at all. And that's fine. There are lots of sectors where not making a decision, avoiding decisions like the plague, while still calling yourself an executive, is a very viable way to structure a career. But the only kind of organization that I'm talking about here is the kind of organization where that is not going to lead to a good outcome. Now, unfortunately, that's not going to affect some organizations for decades. Fortunately, it's going to affect everything sooner or later. Darwinism wins in the end. Now, so far, I've been talking about decisions. What I should have also said is the thing about decisions is, to make a good decision, you want to use all available information. You want to use all the... That's what makes a good decision, right? Using all available information and using it well. So having the information and not knowing what to do with it, that's not good. Not having information, not so good either. So this whole data thing, data is the fuel that drives good decisions. That's the only reason data exists in business. The only reason we care about data is because data is used to make good decisions. Now, data does not equal good decisions. We really haven't socially adjusted to the presence of data in our organizations. We're still treating it as a weird thing that sits over there that isn't really anybody's business. It's still seen as if it was a computer, data is still where computers were in the 1980s. It's still this weird thing that, there's a little bit of it in every company, but it's only something the geeks do, and we're a little afraid. There's buzzwords abound. Everyone's talking about data, everyone's talking about analytics, heck, everyone's talking about digital. Now, I actually know what data is, I actually know what computers are, I still don't know what digital is. Can someone please explain it to me? I do not know what that word means. So data and analytics abound. A hand?
It's a phrase where they're talking about the cloud. It's phenomenal.
It sounds nebulous. It certainly sounds nebulous, thank you.
Honest. It's a marketing concept.
It's honest, it's a marketing concept. That's the best joke I've heard today. It's honest, it's a marketing concept.
Trust me, brother. I've been in the space for
Well, my point is that you come across whole organizational departments and multiple departments which have the word data and have the word analytics in their title, but seem to have absolutely nothing to do with decision making, and it doesn't bother anyone in that department, and it doesn't bother anyone outside of that department. To me, that's a bit like, oh, we have computers in our company in 1985, we use them as doorstops. They make great doorstops, everybody's happy, and look, they've got flashing lights on them too. The truth is that many data scientists are very miserable in their careers. I know that we're in a recruitment company. If it's news to any of the recruiters here, the data scientists are miserable as hell in large organizations, and churn is just incredible. That should not be news. If anybody's still wondering why this is happening, well, please see my talk titled Questions You Should Ask Your Prospective Employer. It's on my media page. You might find it enlightening. You might want your candidates to view that talk as well. The truth is that many data scientists, and indeed many analytics professionals, are hired for a role other than being a data scientist or being an analytics professional. What that role is, well, I could write a thesis about it, but if I had to summarize it in one word, I'd say pet, or, religious object, something we sort of touch for good luck, something we refer to as saying, oh yeah, we've got one, we're advanced, we've got one of them digital people, it's all good. But we don't actually have to do anything with them. And the reason I finally understood the best way of explaining the reason for these data scientists' unhappiness, the reason all of these phenomena are happening, is that these data scientists work in data illiterate environments. So we're getting people who bring an enormous amount of potential into an organization, in transformative potential. But that organization is not ready for that potential, and worse, they're so unready that they don't even know they're unready. So the Donald Rumsfeld concept of unknown unknown applies. So there's ignorance, like, oh, I don't really know the French language, and then there's like unknown unknown level ignorance, where you don't even know you don't know something or that it matters. And when people hire analytics professionals or start business intelligence functions or want to have a digital transformation but don't have data literacy themselves, aren't themselves intimately a part of this transformation, this happens. What's that?
Valid point.
Thank you.
Confirmation.
More of that, please.
Applause.
Now, using data can enable better decision making. I'd like to think so. I seem to have made a bit of a career of it, so all right. I have a vested interest in making people think this, but hopefully this is not too hard to convince you. So the key purpose of data and data analytics is to facilitate better decision making. I actually am taking issue with one letter on this page, and it's the letter A. That should be that letter A should be the letter the. Yes, the isn't a letter; it's a word. Because I think the purpose of data in organizations is to facilitate better decision making. That's the only purpose. The only purpose. Because it enables us to process and use all the information available to us and apply reason, logic, something other than, I don't know, free association and astrology and random number generation, to make a timely and good decision. Mindful of the fact that our competitors are doing exactly the same thing. And if we want to survive and thrive, we want to do it better than them. We need to decide better than the other people. So what you need in order to leverage data for data-driven decision making is data literacy. Not everybody being a data scientist, but a minimal amount of knowledge about what data is, how data says what it says, how it can be true, how it can be false, and that level of knowledge being below that of a PhD level data scientist, but well above that of the average executive, well above that of the average professional of any profession that starts with A, for example. So my view is that in the future, everybody's going to be a data professional. I guess I should have talked about this in the previous slide, but my point is that just about everything that can be automated will be automated. So what's left? Well, what's left is the stuff that can't be automated. What can't be automated? What can't be automated? I'm beginning to see signs that much of actual coding, much of writing of computer programs itself is becoming automated, actually. But the one thing that we still can't automate is just synthesizing information, turning it into insights, and turning those insights into complex decisions. The moment we can automate that, there'll be no jobs left at all. But luckily, we're nowhere near that yet. But in the meantime, what's there left for people to do? What's left for people to do is the last mile between the synthesis of data and the decision, which means everyone's going to be a data synthesizer. Everyone's going to be kind of a data scientist light, or at least supporting that process in some way. So this now requires a number of skills. We're now at the point where I can start talking about the different components of this thing I call data literacy. And to be perfectly honest with you, the data literacy seems like the right kind of buzz phrase, tag for it, because it does have to do with data and analytics and so forth. But much of the literacy isn't really so much about data, it's more about logic, reasoning, science. So let's go through it. The single most important part is this one, comfortable with uncertainty. And it has two different parts. It has an intellectual part and it has an attitudinal part. The intellectual part is key because it's where numeracy starts, where that numeracy goes beyond arithmetic and simple algebra. It's the numeracy that goes beyond the numeracy that everybody now has in order to do Excel spreadsheets. It's the numeracy in particular of the uncertain. And it's the stuff that most people in this room did in first year university, never really understood and properly forgot. It's statistics. So you may not like it, but the language of data is statistics. I may not like it. I still need to learn Mandarin. I'm a big fan of Kung Fu. I've just got back into my Kung Fu after several years. And I realize now that if I want to be really serious with my Kung Fu, I'm going to have to learn Mandarin, because that's the language. That's the language of the masters. Well, never mind what the language of the data scientist is. The language of the data itself is statistics. And what do I mean by that? I mean that there are concepts in statistics. There are ways of thinking about the world that only people who are trained in statistics have. And it's almost impossible for me to convey them to you now very quickly without actually teaching them to you properly. But different languages have different concepts, different complex and fine-grained ideas. Statistics is like that. And one key idea of statistics really comes down to two ideas. And one key idea of that is uncertainty. Statistics is the study of just two things, uncertainty and complexity, and how those two things go together. And of the two, the most important one is uncertainty. So if you're not comfortable with uncertainty, you're not comfortable with the future. What do I mean by that? Well, how many times have I come across people who are asking for a forecast and saying, just give me the number, and not realizing that a single number in the context of a forecast is suicide. It's worse than useless. It's ridiculous because the future is uncertain. It's a probability distribution. And if you're not asking what is the range of possibilities, asking what the temperature is tomorrow is meaningless without having an idea of what's a sensible range for the temperature tomorrow. Because there's one thing I can guarantee you, whatever temperature you predict for tomorrow, you're not going to get that exact number as the average temperature. So will you get exactly that number? No. The question is, how far off will you be? How far off matters greatly, because if the range is huge, like it is in some deserts, you're going to need to bring like an asbestos suit to ward off the heat and a parka for the cold. Yeah, even if the average temperature is 24 degrees. And uncertainty has a whole lot more structure to it. This is just what we call univariate uncertainty. This is not a class on statistics, but for most people in the business world, uncertainty is an unknown unknown in the data sense. And for most executives who are asking advice in the context where they're trying to make sometimes decisions and making those decisions in the context of risk, and they don't have the language to talk about risk, uncertainty, probability, risk, when they don't have the language to talk about it, that is a massive literacy failure. And I've seen incredibly exasperated analysts, data scientists, so many times talking to me about uncertainty illiterate executives. Now, uncertainty, as I said, there is what I might call the intellectual side of uncertainty, which is statistics. And then there is the attitudinal aspect. And the attitudinal aspect is the idea that we live in an uncertain world. The idea that we can't plan everything as much as we'd like to. The idea that plans must come with contingencies. The idea that discovery is a business activity. So there's this thing where we do projects, there's this thing where we just do business as usual, but there's also this other thing where we just keep eyes and ears open to try to find opportunities and threats. And our next action is not determined by our Gantt chart, our next action is determined by what we discover. We can plan to search, but we can't plan to find something, and we certainly can't plan to do the next thing after we find it. And for a lot of startups, particularly in the lean startup space, that's their life. They're always iterating, they're always exploring, they're always experimenting. So this comfort with uncertainty as a way of life, and finally, where the two meet, the attitudinal and the intellectual, is being comfortable with uncertain insights. Being comfortable with the idea that, no, I don't know what you should do, but here are the possibilities and here are the different payoffs. And no, I don't know what's going to happen, but here are the likelihoods. And then it's up to you to make a call. And no, I haven't made your life more difficult, and I'm not being useless by not giving you an actionable insight. By the way, you know what an actionable insight is? An actionable insight is when an executive doesn't want to do any thinking and they want you to do the thinking for them so they can take credit. Because the executive's actual job is to synthesize information. Oh, here is a dirty secret of data science and data analytics. I'm not going to embarrass people by asking them to raise their hands, but just mentally raise your hand if you think the purpose of data analytics is to make decisions easier. Because it's not. Its purpose is to make decisions better. It actually makes decisions harder, and you need a certain kind of person who's a sucker for punishment, right? There's someone who likes thinking about complexity and numbers and probability and multivariate statistics, and all in a business context, and all in the context of risk, reward, constraints, etc., in order to make difficult decisions. Difficult decisions, and doing it with the sort of torturous, complex insights that computers spit out but can't chew anymore, at least for the time being. That's what we have clever people for. So yeah, if you want to stay relevant in the 21st century, it pays to be comfortable with uncertainty in every sense of the word, and that's just the beginning. The next step, and it relates to being comfortable with uncertainty, is understanding science. So suddenly, first of all, maths just ran away from the lab and is now not just a useful business skill, but a vital business skill. Oh, and I should have said one more thing. I'm not talking about being able to pass an exam. There are people in this room who probably did much better than me at uni and got much better grades. It's not about passing exams and forgetting everything. It's about having an intimate intuition with the subject matter. You do not have a textbook knowledge of how to navigate your smartphones. You just do it natively and intuitively. You need to have that native and intuitive intuition for data as well. And beyond that, how do you deal with uncertainty? How do you deal with an uncertain world? Well, you actually have to prod it and see what it does. You actually have to experiment. And yes, there is rigor, there is science around that. And the data aspect is, when you're doing experiments, you're actually shaping the data generating process. You're not just passively taking data as it comes, because the data that comes may not be the relevant data. When you're conducting experiments, you're collecting the information you need, you're isolating the things you need to make decisions about. So not only has mathematics jumped out of the lab and into the boardroom, so has science. Experiments are a vital part of business these days, from A/B tests in the marketing context to well, again, marketing, to the way people run campaigns, to any number of initiatives. A scientific approach is key, and indeed we have a whole study of things like econometrics, not because it's just, well, some people think it's fun, but not just because it's fun, but because when you're running a country, when you're running the economy of a country and you can't run experiments, you still want a degree of certainty. You still want to use the best rigor you can. So you need to understand experiments, not just so you can run them, but also so you can wish you could run them, and you could know what you could do when you can't run them. So to be intimate with science is also data literacy. Obviously, to be comfortable with basic mathematics and statistics. Mathematics is not just statistics, and there's a whole lot of other stuff that people, again, don't need to be experts in, but they at least need to know that the categories exist. People need to know what optimization is. People need to know what network analysis is. People need to have an ability to at least understand what analysts are presenting to them. And with statistics, they need to know what relationships are. So when I said statistics is about complexity, it's only about uncertainty and complexity, I could have been a little bit gentler and said statistics is about certainty and relationships. So the language of relationships is statistics. And I would say at a minimum, people really need to be able to use data visualization, and not just use data visualization as by being a recipient of, let's face it, fairly simple sort of infotainment, which is what a lot of data visualization is. And its purpose half the time isn't even to inform, it's just to, validate someone's status or entertain someone, but to actually actively explore data sets. I don't think you're going to be able to have a job if you can't explore data sets in 10 years' time. So here is a slide that's comparing the literacies of today with some of the literacies of tomorrow. And I have to say, the literacies of today here, some of you are probably looking at this and going, heck, I know people who don't even have those. So I'd say a fairly competent professional today would be literate. They can read and write. They can probably express themselves hopefully quite well. So, literacy beyond just simple reading, writing, spelling, but just able to express ideas, able to structure thought, maybe able to persuade. Simple numeracy, and simple numeracy is usually arithmetic. Maybe a bit of algebra, and this is where people already falter. Obviously financial literacy. You just cannot be a serious executive and not know how to read a balance sheet. Computer literacy I already talked about, and computer literacy alone is huge. Process and project literacy. People in this room, I think, are extremely process and project literate. Now, basic visualizations, bar chart, pie chart, etc. I can do a whole talk about why pie charts are evil. I don't know how they got into corporate culture, but the fact that they persist, it is up there as one of my bits of evidence that something's very wrong. One of my favorites, logic. Now, a competent executive is good at logic. Logic is one of those things that most people aren't good at, and most people are so bad at it they don't even know what it is, and they will be offended if you tell them they're bad at it. To tell someone they're being illogical is a huge insult, and in most cases an objective fact. And incidentally, it's also something where when someone is illogical, you can prove it to someone else, but you can't prove it to them. Because they're illogical, this whole proving thing doesn't work for them. So, there are clever people who are good at logic. There are clever people who are good at explicit logic. They're a minority, but let's say this is the aspirational literacies of today. And one very, very attractive literacy, and I'm finding it's infecting my field right now, not that I'm against it necessarily, but I have a complex relationship with it, is this whole idea of narratives and storytelling. We're definitely very much a narrative culture. We definitely reward people who are very rich in linguistic skill and cultural attunement and the ability to spin a story relative to someone who's really, really good at abstract reasoning, probabilistic reasoning, logic and so forth. We actually like stories more than we like truth. We actually get we get sucked in by stories all the time. The thing that gets me is how apparently storytelling is the must-have data scientist skill today and of the future. My retort is it's the must-have data science skill today because of the kinds of managers that these poor data scientists have to report to. I don't think they'll be reporting to them in the future, however. And the thing is, communicating with people is not going to go away, but the skill of communicating with smart people is a very, very different skill to what everybody thinks communication is. So this narratives and storytelling thing, watch this space. The dinosaurs were big and scary too, for a while. Let's talk about the future. So as I said, probabilistic reasoning, being able to use the word maybe consistently and in shades of grey and in a very rich way, I mean, that, and again, the uncertainty part of statistics is just the poetry of maybe. The probabilistic reasoning, that is the number one skill that is vital, I think, for the executives of the future, and I think going to be a vital part of the data literacy toolkit. Experimentation, I've already talked about. Understanding science, and particularly causality. So something I haven't talked about is this idea of causality. It's one thing to go, hey, look at the data says that this relates to this. Now statistics is limited. Statistics, for all its power, is really good at relationships. It can say that this relates to that in this way, or these things relate to these things in that way. Here's what statistics on its own can't do. Statistics can't say this causes this. And I'm still sounding abstract. Let me say something that's a bit more business focused. Statistics on its own can't say, if we do this, this will happen. Which is really what you want to know as an executive. Because that's what decisions are made of. Which of these things should we do? Because each one of them has a set of outcomes. Which gives me the best outcomes? Well, that's what causality is all about. So understanding science, understanding that interplay of statistics, science, and business, that's run away from the lab. And again, we have experts. This is the hardest data science to do is causality. I'm not saying everybody has to be a causality expert, but you need to be conversant in it. And when I say conversant, you need to at least understand what it's for. You need to be able to tell good from bad. You don't need to be a cook in the causality space, but you need to be a connoisseur. The scientific method, basic statistics, common visualizations. You don't need to be a data scientist, but again, you don't need to be a cook of data science, but you need to be a connoisseur of data science. You need to be able to tell good from bad. You need to be able to tell which kinds of data science you need. You need to be able to digest the results once they're given to you. You need to play your part. Because what I'm finding is a data illiterate business can't be a customer of analytics. And I say this to all of you here who are consultants in analytics. I say this to all of you who are recruiters in analytics. You want data literacy in your clients because then they'll be better clients. They'll be more appreciative of quality and they'll have overall more demand of the material. And the last one, the one that's perhaps the hardest to explain, especially when it's late in the evening, I haven't had a red wine though, it's probably easier with a red wine, is abstraction. I find that a lot of people in business have a lot of trouble with abstraction. And I'd say abstraction is the 21st century version of narratives and storytelling. Abstraction is not the same thing as an analogy, but to people who don't know the difference, it looks like an analogy. Abstraction is when you identify the key characteristics of something and realize that it's exactly like something else and you can reason it like it that way. Beyond abstraction, there's this idea of leaky abstraction where you also realize where there still are differences and you have to keep an eye on them. The ability to think abstractly is something that people with philosophy Ph.D.s have, that people with maths degrees have, and generally a lot of other people don't. But abstraction is, and people in IT, particularly people working with object-oriented software, have an understanding of abstraction as well. Yes?
I like the slide. You talk about the future. What time span do you have for what does future is? Are you looking at 5 years, 10 years, 20 years?
Well, hard to tell because it's like where, in what industry, at what role. I would say there's already companies where just about everybody has this, from the CEO on down. Those companies exist. But they're the exception, they're not the rule. Now, you're asking when will corporations look like that? Well, I'll answer you with a curveball. I'm not sure corporations will still be around when this comes along.
Because what I see is there's a big shift from the left to right. There's a change journey, and the decision makers on the of the future are already sitting in the mid level of management, depending on what time span you're talking about. So this is high level of education and awareness. How do you see the?
Sorry, what's the question?
The question is how. The question is today's people who are sitting in the mid level of management would be the future decision makers. What's the change journey for them to actually get into? This is high education we are talking about, and a lot of people at the mid level management are not into that.
Okay, first of all, cards on the table. After thinking about this for a long time and running a data science training business, I have decided to reorient completely. Still teaching data science, but the course I'm teaching personally and the one I'm focused on most is the data literacy course and the data-driven decision-making for executives course, because I believe in this. So, you know, hands up, hey, do my course, and I don't think there are too many courses like it. But having said that, I'll be honest with you. I think there's way too much emphasis on courses in this industry. I think courses are a necessary but far from sufficient thing. So in terms of developing people, people need to be mentored. Now, where do you find good mentors? People need ongoing mentoring in these disciplines by people who are already masters of them. How do we do that? Tricky, right? Here's something even worse. People need to have the incentive. Now, keeping up with the Joneses is a terrible incentive. The problem with keeping up with the Joneses as an incentive is someone's always going to come along and tell you, oh, look, yeah, here's a data literacy certificate you can have there. You can feel better now. You're officially data literate. There can always be, you know, if all you want to do is keep up with the Joneses, but you don't have your own experience of it and you don't have any mentoring, it's going to be problematic. Now, in terms of answering your question earlier, where you said how a current organisation is going to head in this direction, I was being very serious. First of all, I'm not convinced that the large corporation, publicly listed company structure that we have now will persist for, you know, a decade or 2 decades from now. Secondly, even if it persists, it's not at all clear to me that the organisations that dominate now will dominate in that time. What is clear to me is that changing the culture of an existing organisation is super hard. So I'm not going to say it's impossible, because A, it'll break a lot of people's hearts, and B, none of us will make any money. Also, it's it's being a bit negative, but I will say this: most will fail. I would be very surprised if more than 10% of digital transformations are actually successful. Does that answer your question?
How do you change how would you change those executives to fall into this?
Very good question. Well, the question is, who am I? I mean, I could be, for example, someone who has nothing to do with an organization at all, right? And my ability to do so is limited. Or I could be a shareholder, a very small shareholder, and my ability to do so is limited. Or I could be an employee, say a mid-level project manager. And guess what? My ability to do this is limited. If there isn't true incentive to do this from the top, it's not going to happen. Now, I want to tell you something about that. Something I hear repeatedly, and it grates me, is when I hear, oh, our senior executive is very supportive of data analytics. They're very supportive of the transformation. And I go, what does that mean, supportive? They're constantly talking about how important it is, and they've set aside all this budget. And I'm going, yeah, that's easy for them to do. Tell me how they've engaged with it. Tell me how they're not just cheerleaders of this thing that they don't understand and don't think is their business. Tell me how they're this thing's biggest customers, because forgive me if I'm wrong, but I thought CEOs actually make decisions. And they'd want to make good decisions. And this stuff helps make good decisions, and they should be the number one fan and actually the number one user of this stuff, not just the number one fan. So I would say, obliquely to answer your question, how you would do it is to deal with organizations where the executives are literate and engaged. The literacy goes from the top down. I really don't believe in bottom-up in the context of analytics, but a lot of data scientists do. Everyone wants to affect bottom-up change. And I always say to them, who the hell are you? You're an employee. There are shareholders who own multiples more than you will earn over your career with that company, and even they don't matter. There are people far more important than you that are enacting Byzantine politics. Who are you to make a change in this company? Where's your stake? Stake has to come down from the real will and engagement with the change. Not just the will for change, but the engagement with the change, and the literacy has to come from the top down. I hope that answers your question. Yes?
Do you think this is more of a generational change where...
Sorry.
Is this something we can teach the old dogs, as it were, myself included in that matter? Or is it a generational thing where the younger people who are the tech savvy lead the way?
It's not about being tech savvy. And,
For example, I guess,
and
changes.
I'd say I saw some very interesting research recently that showed they looked at search effectiveness. They gave certain online search tasks to people by age band. And guess what? In that study, millennials suck at search. They just didn't have, compared to other groups, at least in that study, the certain personal characteristics enable them to sort of creatively use a search engine. Go figure. I don't know. I'm not going to draw any conclusions from that. All I'll say is implicit in your question is a bigger assumption, I think. You can tell me if I'm wrong. And the assumption is that the problem is one of education. Yeah. Yes, but it's worse than that. Because you have to ask, what's preventing so many executives at the top level from acquiring this knowledge? I've heard a very interesting quote, and I forget who it is. It was an American writer, I believe, who said, never underestimate a man's ability to not understand something when his income relies on him not understanding it. The incentives are much bigger problem than the understanding. I would say that as long as we have the incentive structures that we have at the moment in our large organisation, as long as we have the rewards that look at your head count and look at your budget rather than they look at your effectiveness, as long as we have the rewards that look at your ability to tell narratives and tell stories rather than your ability to tell the truth, as long as we have a culture that uses technical as a derogatory term, meaning you're using logic and stuff, that's bad manners. As long as logic is bad manners and not offending anyone with the truth is good manners, as long as we have that culture, we'll have bad incentives. And I actually think there's only one surefire cure to that culture, and that's a huge economic crash. And I'm not saying I'm planning one, and I'm not saying I foresee one, but I'm saying the paradox with this data stuff is we've had 26 years of sustained economic growth in this country, so this whole data revolution has happened over a period of time when it actually didn't matter. Because when does this stuff matter? This stuff matters in times of adversity. Little companies have times of adversity all the time, but we as an economy and the corporates as a whole haven't had those times of adversity. So all this analytic stuff has been a curiosity, has been a status symbol, has been a slush fund for all this readily available budget. Yes, hand up the back.
I just want to put a slightly alternative perspective to what you just said. And I'm a big supporter of BAD, learned Six Sigma, Jack Welch and GE 20 years ago, that the whole world went through a GFC that was a massive disruption to all the stability that helped make the right side thinking that you're talking about a reality for then one of the biggest companies in the world. It was the way they continued to be a leader. After the GFC, not being able to rely on hard data and everything almost on the left-hand side of the column, for the chart rather, for the whole world has become a challenge. Australia survived that, but not the world.
Yes.
And not big corporates, including big corporates, that work in Australia. So how does that fit into that thinking that you're talking about?
Well, I think you're right. So half the time I'm talking about the world, and half the time I'm talking about 26 years of sustained economic growth, which is us. You're right. The GFC did not hit us anywhere near as hard as anyone else, and this was I think quite as true just before the GFC. I do, however, see that what we've got, what this data literacy revolution thing is, it's a coming thing that's only just started. I think that the incentives issue that I discussed with you is the thing that's holding it back. I think you're right, the rest of the world is further ahead, primarily due to, first of all, the economic shock, which supports my point, and secondly, the stronger exposure to competitive action. However, I think that Dilbert still does well globally, and I can't laugh at Dilbert anymore. I I look at Dilbert and I go, if anything, this is less funny and less bizarre than the things I actually see. But what I hear from my Alpha Zeta colleagues around the world and my other friends around the world and so forth, you know, we are an island, but we're not an island. What happens here is a more extreme case of what happens everywhere. And it's more to do with incentives. We need a revolution in how we organize large numbers of people to do things. We need a successor to the publicly listed company. And maybe something like the DAO, which failed, but hopefully the next one won't, might be a viable successor. We need ways for people to have skin in the game in a way they don't now. Any more questions? I saw a hand there, yes?
I'm a data scientist by profession, and I've seen a reluctance coming from top management always. Like where I've seen from many organizations, the top management knows that they have to be data literate, but there's a reluctance from their side. Okay, they always try to prove that can data science do say something with certainty, which is not possible. Okay, so how to sell that thing? Like I've always faced that problem time and again.
Okay, this is not the talk for you.
Yeah.
I'm trying to tell you what's wrong. Like I'm trying to explain what I think is an intractable pathology. The reason you have revolutions is because you have an intractable pathology. You've just said that's all fine, Eugene, but I'm living in the intractable pathology. What do I do about it? Please watch my video titled "Questions to Ask Your Prospective Employer," where I start by saying everybody ask me the question you just asked, and it's too late because you're already there. Maybe you can reboot things at your next performance review, but more likely this is something to be aware of for your next job. All I can say to you is don't think that what's happening to you now is only going to happen where you are now. I'm hard-pressed to find corporate jobs that aren't like that at least some of the time. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Not in a very helpful way, sorry.
Eugene, you talk about the post-corporational world. It's very fascinating. But obviously some corporations will survive. Could you name them? Like it could be a Google. I mean, Google collected so much information about us, right?
Prescient, Alpha Zeta.
Really?
People's Republic of China. Maybe, maybe. I don't know. I actually don't know. I think the courage to, by the way, the courage to say I don't know is a very important skill. And yeah, it is a form of cowardice as well, but you can get away with it. I don't know is a very important thing to say these days. And a clever boss won't say, tell me something. A clever boss will say, quantify your I don't know. Do you not know at all, or are you just not sure a little bit? That's what a clever boss should be asking you. Yes?
Regards to revolution, artificial intelligence is already making recommendations to executives. When is there going to be a tipping point that the executives don't need this, they just accept the informed decisions, and their issue is around abstraction and uncertainty, and therefore when do they take a risk rather than accept the recommendations?
Well, me and the other machine learning Ph.D.s, we got together last Wednesday and we decided that the singularity will happen I think January the 8th, 2033. That's the plan. Well, I'll take your suggestion. Look, the truth is that there are some organizations in some sectors that you could say are driven by AI. They're very, very specific. Like a hedge fund is very much AI driven. A sports betting fund is very much AI driven. I know because I've got one of each. But they're very small and very rare examples, and our large corporations don't run that way at all. And what AI does in large organizations is actually replace very low-level decisions. Very frequent, recurring decisions like sell to this person, don't sell to this person, sell to this person, don't sell to this person. What AI does not do in most places and will not do for a long time is say, go and acquire that company, go and exit this market, and go and hire this person to be your CEO.
So why do you think that's a long way away? I don't agree.
Okay.
But I just wonder, why do you think that? Given the exponential growth of technology and other changes in our world, why do you think this one's going to be slow?
Because I've been studying machine learning for 30 years.
Okay. So it's your knowledge.
It's not that smart. There's a lot of hype around it. I happen to know, and I also listen to. I'm by far not the smartest guy in the field. I don't think I'm that smart at all. But the smartest guys in the field are saying, let's see, Hinton, who's one of the arguably the father of deep learning. He almost invented the modern version of neural nets as well as deep learning. He's certainly one of the co-inventors. He's the guy who says that all that stuff he pioneered is a dead end. You listen to a lot of the people in the industry who are actual workers in machine learning. So, by the way, the one bit of AI that's going places is machine learning. Okay, there's lots of other bits of AI which aren't as much. There's another kind of AI that I'm very excited about that isn't machine learning but works nicely with machine learning, and it is going somewhere, and that's sort of semantic or cognitive computation. But look, it's not that smart, and you will hear weird weird exceptional examples of it doing clever stuff. But for the most part, what it's doing is automating and making slightly more efficient and slightly more accurate very low-level stuff. It's not it is replacing executives in very specific places, like hedge funds, where it's replacing analysts. So when we think of the fact that AI can replace, say, a pathologist, we think, oh, that's a high-level thing. Well, yes, but what that pathologist does is a kind of it's a trick. It's like they can look at a piece of film and spot something. The sort of things that most executives do are not going to be replaced by AIs anytime soon.
I would formulate it like this. AI is quite good in quantity decisions, but not so far in quality decisions.
I would not agree with that. I would say, first of all decisions are quantitative. I can point to you things that AI does now that are arguably qualitative. The distinction between qualitative and quantitative is a bit like the distinction between technical and strategic. It is itself a qualitative distinction. There is no objective boundary.
Quality decisions.
Quality or qualitative?
Quality. Quality decision.
Say it in Russian. Maybe I'll understand better.
Количественные, качественные.
Qualitative. You're saying qualitative, not qualitative decisions. Yes, I was right the first time.
So would you agree with qualitative decision or not?
No. That's I thought you meant qualitative initially. So the thing is, if a machine learning model is trying to predict how someone feels, is it being qualitative or quantitative?
It's qualitative.
Right. They do that. They already do that. But okay, the problem is. The problem is that when you get down to the nitty-gritty, it's quantitative because there are numbers involved. Sure, but you know what? There are people who say that you could be simulated with a bunch of numbers. Like everything about you could ultimately be simulated quantitatively. Now, we can argue whether that's true or not, and guess what? That's a theological argument, not a scientific one.
You see, there was a famous fairy tale, what is the sense of the life? And super-pooper-duper computer was calculating it, and eventually a group of scientists came to it and asked, do you know sense of life?
42.
Yes.
Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I know it very well. Yes. 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 Well, the answer is that the machine learning now will not just give you 42. It won't do what deep thought did, because the thing is you can't do anything with 42.
You made a point that progress in machine learning
yes.
wouldn't be wouldn't have such exponential rise as our colleague expressed. And I see that indeed, for example, successes in computer vision and image processing wasn't so impressive as is expected 30, 40 years ago.
I agree.
Yeah. I was involved in these projects that time, and optimistic was much more at that time. I am just supporting your point that it wouldn't be such exponential growth for machine learning in the foresee future.
Well, if not with present trends. Now, I'm not discounting someone discovering something completely new. I'm not discounting someone discovering something completely new. So I'm distinguishing between qualitatively different discoveries, which are possible, and just continuing along what Hinton has defined as a dead end. So the thing everyone's excited about, Hinton thinks is a dead end, and I'm inclined to listen to Hinton. Does that make sense? Yes.
I have a question about data literacy.
Yes.
Like myself and probably a lot of people here and in the world consume services from large corporations for which we don't pay money, but we exchange a lot of data about ourselves. And some of these corporations, unlike the ones you've been describing, are actually pretty good at dealing with data and base their entire business model on using data about us to predict our behaviour and influence our behaviour in ways that are not necessarily in our interests. How important is public data literacy, and what do we do about that?
Okay, point one, yes, there are organisations who are extremely good at it. And indeed, why do we have organisations wasting billions and billions of dollars on something they don't appreciate, they don't understand, and where they completely disenfranchise the people they hire to ostensibly do it? Because they're cargo culting, they're sort of blindly imitating the handful of extremely clever, extremely successful organisations that you describe, you know, the unicorns, the Silicon Valley. So yes, you're absolutely right. I'm not talking about them, I'm talking about everyone else. I'm also not talking about ethics or privacy or anything like that. Do those skills give you a greater ability to protect your privacy and autonomy online? Probably not. But you're talking about a completely different set of skills. I'm talking about the workplace of the future. You're talking about the realization that we no longer have privacy and autonomy. Yeah, that kind of sucks, but welcome to the 21st century. Doesn't mean I'm happy about it. I just think it's a foregone conclusion. And you know, the difference is that we can sit here and argue about whether it's good or bad. Go to China, you don't even get to argue. And we're a liberal nirvana compared to them.
I agree with the AI comments. There's nothing more complicated than the human brain, and it'll take another decade or more for computing to catch up. Going away from tonight, and I walk into my next meeting tomorrow with these executives, what are the 3 things you think I could do differently?
Well, I wish executives would walk away with something other than asking for 3 things. I'm asked for...
You want me to walk straight out of my meeting?
No.
What will I do differently?
What will you do? Well, I don't know. I was actually going to... Well, I haven't finished my slides yet. I've got 5 minutes. I've got 5 minutes. Okay. So, dangers of ignoring data literacy. Ignoring data literacy is dangerous. Next slide. The dangers of ignoring data literacy continued. It's still dangerous. Still continued. Wow, I've got a lot to say. What is the data literacy of your environment? Well, here are some questions to ask, and you may want to the thing with these questions is they're always questions to ask yourself quietly and then ask yourself of everyone else quietly before you vocalize them. But it's things like ask how comfortable they are with uncertainty in their decision-making process and uncertainty in their environment. So uncertainty literacy and uncertainty comfort is a huge thing in its own right. Are they conducting experiments? Are they testing the environment they're in? Are they comfortable with statistics? And you know, are they being customers of analytics? Are they using... Here's the number 1. Do they get that the only real purpose of data is to support better decisions, and that their job is to make better decisions, and that data doesn't make decisions for you, it makes decisions harder and better? Those are your takeaway 3, okay? Now, what does uncertainty look like in a business? Well, the fact that you can't plan for uncertainty, you can't, if you're doing experiments and your actions are determined by your experiments, you can't really plan some things. You can still use Gantt charts and you can still plan stuff, but not everything. Knowing when to plan and knowing when to wing it, this is a key art. And not just jumping into uncertainty and experimentation for the hell of it, but doing it with a sense of payoff. Being an entrepreneur, looking for the payoff, taking bets. Some stuff on experimentation. Okay, so how do you improve your data literacy? Well, get trained in, I guess, citizen data science. Get trained in the basics. Yeah, do my data literacy course. It's not bad. If you see any others, tell me. I'm curious to see if anybody else is jumping on the bandwagon. I don't think anyone is so far. But more important than courses, find a mentor. And here's the bad news. Most people in this room won't. Good mentors are hard to find. But if you can find a good mentor, this is key. And try to be hired in a decision support role. This is the job of the future. And do see my What Data Scientists Should Ask a Prospective Employer talk. Do improve your data literacy. They're prescient, apparently. Remember, Prescient is one of the corporations of the future, and apparently they have courses in this. There are a whole lot of online courses, and more importantly, study groups and meetup groups. There are so many meetup groups. Again, yes, I run this one and this one, but I don't run the others. Oh no, I run that one as well. But I don't run the others, and they're all pretty good. Most notably, I don't run Data Science Melbourne, which I'm ashamed to say has 4,000 more members than mine here in Sydney. We only have just under 6,000. Is that hand going up, meaning I should finish?
Yeah, Dr. Eugene.
Huh?
Thank you for the presentation. One question would be, I understand that statistics and mathematics is inherent to becoming a good data scientist, but from an employability perspective, in the market there are lots of tools. If you take data visualization, you have Tableau, you have Power BI.
Forget the buzzwords. Stop looking at the tools.
Right. So, what according to you would be the top two tools, of budding data scientists? Because I understand that is something.
The top two tools are science and statistics.
But I think job descriptions would also.
I'm not giving you a talk on how to get a job today. I'm giving you a talk about how maybe to keep your job in 10 years' time. I don't know which tools are going to matter in 10 years' time. Look, I did a combined mathematics computer science degree. All the computer science I learned is now woefully obsolete. I've forgotten it all. But the maths is more relevant now than ever, especially with the advent of quantum computing.
Dr. Eugene, point taken. My professor back in my uni used to say, mean median mode would get you the job, standard deviation would get you the promotion. But I think the world has changed, and you have to have understanding of basic tools, be it Tableau, be it Power BI, or you have to have knowledge of scripting tools, be it, Python.
If your resume starts with all the tools you know, I would not hire you.
Point taken, but I would say that still,
Your point?
Because you are in the industry, you're a stalwart, you know better than all of us. So you would know what the market,
No, I have no idea, because I haven't had to. I've been in business for myself for 11 years, so I don't know what will get you employed, because I haven't had to look for a job for 11 years. But what I'm saying is, I could be completely wrong about all this. But if I'm right about this, the last thing you should worry about is which tools to learn. And here's the other thing. This is not a how to get a job in data science today talk. If this was, I'd say go learn Python and R. It's that simple. Go learn Python and R.
So your move, what you focus on, what you train people on, so are they, tool specific, or do you...
It's a mix. I try to make it tool independent, but you need to have a tool for everything, as you say.
Yeah, so that's my point.
At the moment, most of my courses, where there are tools, most of my courses are R tools, R courses. I do have a course on Python, and things like deep learning are Python courses, but I'm trying to make every course I have Python and R. I'm also introducing Julia. But I'm telling you again, the tool is the least important element of the stack.
I would disagree over there. I understand that you need to have the basic understanding of statistics and mathematics.
I understand that you understand. Thank you. Any more questions? And I think, find a mentor. Really, really, really important. Find a good mentor. Find several if you can. Do work in data-driven decision-making. Why am I going backwards? There you go. There you go. Thank you, and the questions can continue. Thanks.
For someone who bags storytelling, you're a very good storyteller.
I've been told that before. Thank you.
Do we have questions? We have some time, maybe for a couple of questions. Rahul?
Pass this on to the next person, okay?
Thank you. So my question is all about uncertainty.
About what?
Uncertainty.
Uncertainty, yes.
So it's all about uncertainty and the acceptance of uncertainty. But with the maturity of everything that we do, isn't it better to reduce the uncertainty in our data, our presentations, in our visualizations?
Well, you're not wrong on the second point, and you're not wrong on the first point. I need to explain to you why they're not a contradiction. Uncertainty is not your friend. You know, just like the military wouldn't exist if there were no enemies. The military doesn't love the enemy, but you know, doctors don't love disease, but doctors wouldn't have a job if there was no disease. So it's not that we're meant to love uncertainty. Our job is to control uncertainty, you're right. Our job is to reduce it, completely negate it. The dream of 19th century engineering is to have no uncertainty at all. On time, on budget, to spec, right? The reality is uncertainty's there. So our job is to, well, if not make friends with it, at least learn to live with it. Quantify it. Tame it to a certain extent. Be familiar with it. Have a way of maneuvering around it. And you're right with things like analysis. If we can do away with the uncertainty, so be it. But what you don't do is you don't hide uncertainty, particularly when it's crucial, particularly when you're doing things like forecasting. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe a couple of more?
In terms of data, we have relational database, we
Yeah.
have network database. So far, we have also big data, which is all kinds of information jump into a pool, and we can search it. And do you see in the future we have another kind of way to collecting data or to sort of data or put logic into it, a part of the three type?
I'll answer slightly obliquely. There's one kind of data that interests me greatly. You see, most decisions are not made with electronic data, yeah? But I would argue that all decisions are made with data, because everything we know is data. Everything we know, everything we think, everything we feel, that's data. We have information informing every decision. The point is, most of that information isn't sitting in a computer. I'm very interested in that information in the heads of executives, and one of the things I've been working on are ways of using surveys, ways of using surveys to get at key strategic decision making of the executives and actually assess like strategic decision making KPIs on that basis. It has a lot to do with forecasting. So forecasting is how you make this objective, because people who forecast well are people who make good decisions. So I think I tend to not worry so much about the big data and the large reams of data initially. I'm interested in which data is important, and very often it's not even collected. And the first thing to do is to collect it.
When you talk about big corporations, bureaucracy, sorry. When you talk about big corporations, surely what we're really talking about is politics, territoriality, personality disorders, all that kind of stuff.
I saw it described as monkey business in a tweet today, as in base primate incentives and behavior. So yes, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the human element, and the thing is that it wasn't ever thus, and it doesn't have to be like that now. I always say, is this happening in China? Well, kind of, but in a different way. The thing is that we can make people more accountable than ever. I mean, this data stuff is really about feedback loops and accountability. I think the great tragedy of the late 20th, early 21st century in the West is the systematic destruction of feedback loops in our organizations. I actually think they're being sabotaged. So we've had the tech to do really, really, really good analytics for about 30 years. And yet, every second organization I come across seems to be undergoing some sort of transformation to, for the first time for some reason, implement the most trivial, unambiguous measures of the most important things in the organization. Because somehow they never get it right. And it strikes me as very odd that they shouldn't have after all this time. So I posit sabotage as at least one possible hypothesis.
Great. Because I have the mic, I get the opportunity to ask the last question. So we have been talking at the back, and you know, if you know, Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book on Blink, which is basically you know, people taking decision based on intuition, and saying that people with experience, when they take decision based on intuition, it is almost as good as a data-driven decision. So what are your thoughts about intuition and, you know, the balance between the both?
I think it's not good to say mean things about people too much, so I'm not going to say anything about Malcolm Gladwell. Let's just say that wishful thinking sells, and I might have a very different view.
Cool, great. So thank you so much. Yeah, it was really a good conversation and discussion. I'm sure. I think what I personally got from the whole kind of experience and you know, the talk was that there is definitely a value in kind of adding to you know, how we explain things to the senior management. I mean, we are going through a sort of a structural change at where I work, and you know, they've just put the whole data strategy on hold because they don't know what the team was doing. So I'm sure that people you know, realize, and I have met data scientists who have been asked to prove themselves as to what value they are adding. So you know, this talk was really interesting, and thank you so much, Eugene, you know, for spending this time with us. So